It's been 100 days since you give me the privilege of being your governor, and all the members of the press are here if you can't see. And I just tell you, two things that are sort of important to me, then really open it up. One thing I found during the campaign and before is I thought that this is a state that was a little bit disconnected, that the whole was less than the sum of the parts, that as I went around the state, small towns thought we were all about Hartford. The cities thought that nobody quite understood their struggles. The business community said nobody's been talking to us for a long time. Why are we here? Labor and the teachers, said nobody's really respecting us for the work we do on behalf of the people of the state. And the Republicans and Democrats were just shouting at each other in this building. I'd say after 100 days, Republicans and Democrats are still shouting at each other. But I've tried, I think, to change the nature of the relationships. I've worked really hard, starting with this administration, to make people be able to look at our administration and see somebody who they know identifies with them. It's the most diverse administration in terms of gender. It's the most diverse administration in terms of racial diversity. And it doesn't get as much play, but it's also diverse in terms of the backgrounds of people who are taking over the jobs. Folks from inside the Hartford ecosystem and far afield from the Hartford ecosystem. It's a lot of folks who come from the private sector who have a great public spirit but really want to contribute to the state. So I've tried to, make a change there. I've tried very hard to reach out to the business community and make sure that they know that we are listening and we want them to stay, we want them to grow, and we want them to expand. And with Jim Smith and Ingenuity and now David Lamont and what we're doing to recast the old CERC and have the business leaders be the advocates and champions for the state of Connecticut, and have them actively involved in promoting a state that's been a little down on itself was very important to me, and I think we've had some success there. I've only passed one bill, so I can't point to a massive legislative record, but that bill, when we took care of federal employees who were not collecting a paycheck during the shutdown or the threat of a shutdown, people said, Gov, let's go use the Workmen's Compensation Fund, and I said, look, aren't they a little underwater? Let's work with the private sector. Let's work with the banks. And that sort of was a testament to how we wanted to operate. And we had strong bipartisan support for that bill. And that's what I wanted to see going forward. That's what I saw when we got Stanley Black & Decker and Travelers to step up and forgive student loans. We worked with WIN, we worked with New London and the new peer, public-private, in order to get that part going. I don't think celebrated is the right word, but we did sign a long-term agreement with Millstone, the nuclear power plant, just a couple of days ago. And that was a threat, that was a threat that they could potentially pull the plug. They had somebody stand up and speak and say, this is what happened in Wisconsin. We weren't able to get together and reach a deal. So that was public and private negotiating in good faith. I think that's some of what we've tried to get done in terms of tone, temperament, making people feel like they have a government that's listening and they're part of this government and we're working together going forward. If I have, I don't know if it's a disappointment, but I do find in the political world people are confronted with false choices. And I'm working really hard to make sure that my friends across the way there, we're not just talking about we got a legislative race in a couple of years, but look about this state in the next 5 years. Look at this state in the next 10 years, and where can we make a difference? And, when I say a false choice, let's face it, the big issue consuming this building and a lot of folks around the state is what we do to get our transportation system into the 21st century. How do I speed up Metro North? How do I end the gridlock on 84 and 95? And what a difference that makes in terms of jobs and opportunity. And, I've come up with a solution. It's not a popular solution, but it's a real solution, and it's an important solution to use electronic tolling so that the truckers pay their fair share, the out-of-staters do that, the users of the highway do that going forward. And the only thing I've asked is come forward with a credible alternative. And the alternative that came up, look, I supported something called the debt diet. What was that, 90 days ago, 60 days ago. And it was well received. People understood it was really important that our borrowing had gone up well over $600 million a year for the previous 8 years. The markets responded. Standard & Poor's said, finally, Connecticut is getting its fiscal house in order. And they raised our outlook from neutral to positive. This is a shot in the arm for a state that needs a shot in the arm. We went and did our first bond deal, and it was oversubscribed, and it's going to save the state $50 million a year in interest. So it was surprising to me that the Republican alternative to our transportation funding strategy was to borrow more in the backs of the taxpayers. Instead of going a debt diet, add another $700 million a year, and what that does to the fixed costs of the state. I appreciate, the good news is there's no longer debate about how important transportation is. And there's really not much of a debate about how much more new money we need. We've said we could raise about $800 million out of our tolling plan. They've said they could raise $700 million a year by increased borrowing and debt. So we agree more or less in terms of what we need to do. But to me, you got to give people a real choice, and you can't come up with fake choices. And to me, just more borrowing is the exact thing that got us into the mess we're in going back a generation. But that said, I'll just leave you with the fact that I have said we have an open door. I've had good conversations privately with folks on both sides of the aisle. We've had good constructive negotiations with our friends in labor. We got some big things we got to do. It's a lot easier to do them together. I think the business community is at least given us a chance, given the state of Connecticut another chance, a chance to grow here and expand here. And I'm going to do everything not to squander what is an amazing state at a crossroads and a chance to make a big difference, not just for the next 4 years, but going forward. So it's been 100 days to the T, and I just wanted to have a chance to talk to you guys a little more informally. So go at it.
Governor, you say that there's false information about your tolling position, but the Republicans would say you just put out false information about their prioritized progress program. They're not talking about borrowing more. They're talking, at least this is what they say, they're talking about prioritizing what we do borrow for and do more for transportation and less for other stuff.
I said it's a false choice. I think it's a false choice when you say we're just going to borrow more. And as you point out, Mark, okay, they don't want to borrow more. They'll keep within our, $1,900 million a year. But if $700 million of that goes to transportation, there's nothing left, really, to speak of for anything else. That's it for rebuilding schools. That's it for, clean water and affordable housing. And if they say Ned's being, histrionic, that's not true, we'll be able to do it all. You won't be able to do it all within that debt diet. You're either going to jack up the amount of borrowing you do, or you're going to shut out everything else. I think that's a fact.
Governor, have you been meeting with any private investors to talk about public-private partnerships on tolls?
Very informally. It's pretty early on that, but I appreciate the question. I mean, I look at LaGuardia Airport. I look at the Tappan Zee Bridge. I look at how New York is doing important construction projects that are going to make a generational difference in that city, and for us a little bit. And, I'm open. Whether we work in collaboration with the privates to put this together, we'll keep control. We keep ownership. We not giving away any of that. So I've had some very preliminary conversations, but, most importantly, I've got to get the legislature on board and give us a green light to move ahead on this.
Well, how are you doing on that? I mean, we've heard you say several times, I've got to get out there and do a better job. I've got to get out there in the next 30 days, I believe you said, most recently, and make this convincing argument. So, are you making your argument? What are your arguments that you're going to be?
Well, I think I'm getting out there. That's part of what right now is all about. What are the arguments? That every single business leader I talk to says, in order for us to grow and expand right here in the state of Connecticut, it's got to be easier for me to get my customers and my state employees to work. right now this gridlock is killing the state of Connecticut. And what can you do to make a difference? I know you're not going to solve it in the next, 3 years, but you got to give us a sense of direction on where we're going. And I've got to make that case to, the people of the state of Connecticut, how important this is. Look, it's not easy. I'm asking folks to sacrifice a little bit so that their kids don't have to pay the cost. We do it up front. We do it in a responsible way, and we get this state moving again. And I'm going to be making that case every day, as long as I can, until the legislature steps forward. And I appreciate it. It's not an easy vote for them. It's a lot easier to say, let's not do anything, or let's postpone it, or let's borrow a little more. And those are the wrong decisions.
Is there anywhere you were in this toll discussion where you think you've misstepped, or you will do something differently?
I think I just got to get out there and explain to people exactly what a 21st century transportation system is. I got to tell people it's not no tolls, it's tolls or taxes. Tolls or taxes. You've got two ways to look at this. Make up your mind. I want the users of the highways to pay this. A lot of them come from out of state. A lot of them are trucker companies, and some of them are Connecticut citizens. I appreciate that, and we're going to do maximum discount for them. Maybe a free gantry, one free gantry. There's a lot of things we can do to make it easier for our Connecticut folks who are getting slammed. I appreciate that, to know that they are making an important investment in the future of the state.
What exactly do you have to do on Metro North? I mean, it's a big, gigantic system. You were literally talking about, what, a half an hour from Stamford to Grand Central, which some people don't really think is possible under the current system. You fixed the Coscob Railroad Bridge. What has to be done on Metro North? I mean, you probably have to do 20 things, but what are the 2 or 3
Joe
things that you gotta
Giletti,
do?
the former president of Metro North, he's great that he is there, because, we got to work hard on that relationship with New York. They sometimes treat us as the kid brother. And,
Sure.
and Metro North, we don't have a place on the board, but we share that railroad. It's a lifeblood for this state. And Giletti, who's our head of transportation, he said, look, we can improve the signalization a little bit. If we can fix up 3 or 4 of those bridges, you can take 15 minutes off that commute. And it's not, $5 billion. We can do that for, a few $100 million and make significant improvement over the next few years. I've got to convince people how important that is. Stamford would be part of the greater New York orbit. Bridgeport would be greater New York orbit. New Haven would now have access back and forth. And if you combine that with 5G, so we have the high-speed internet access in our smallest towns as well as our cities, you can do anything in Connecticut you can do in New York. You don't have to be in New York to do it. That's a big selling point for our state.
Governor, can you talk about some of the challenges that you face now with working with both parties? Lawmakers are very concerned about some of these proposals going back to their districts, constituents maybe not being able to stomach some of those things. What surprised you when you're working on both sides of the aisle with some of these lawmakers?
That the conversations are always a lot more positive than they are once you get in front of a microphone outside the office. I don't think that surprised me, but look, I think a lot of people really know what we got to do, but I'd love to have the Republicans at the table. I mean, we're going to do minimum wage, and some people think we ought to do it over 3 years. Some people think we ought to do it over 13 years. If everybody's at the table, I get a few more votes. It gives me a little more leverage to negotiate this. We're going to do it over 4 years, but the Republicans are a lot more impactful if they are at the table.
If you don't get the things that you want, will you consider that a failure?
No, look, number one, I want an honestly balanced budget. We haven't had that for a long time. I'm going to be strict as heck about no more games where we're borrowing from today to pay, for the future. No more taking short term. None of those games. I think I've got an honest budget out there, and I think the ratings guys sort of, validated that. That's, priority number one for me. 2, I've tried to give the taxpayers some confidence. I'm holding the line on the tax rates. I said, you're not raising the income tax. You're not raising the corporate income tax. It's not going to happen because we've been doing that every 3 years for the last 13 years. And it's a trend that doesn't seem to be righting the ship. I've got to give people a sense of confidence. We got predictability and stability going forward. You know, and obviously I've spent a lot of time on transportation. So, you know, want to know what my priorities are. I just told you, those are 3 big priorities going forward. If you tell me, you know, minimum wage over 5 years, not 3 years, or sub-minimum wage, you know, I can negotiate on that. I'd like to get those things passed, but I think you know what really is important, getting the state moving again.
Governor, on paid family medical leave, you have talked about the possibility of having private management, and you cast one of the advantages of them taking on risks. So can you clarify what you mean by that? Typically with insurance, I mean, in private insurer, yeah, they have the risk, but they also control all the variables as what it costs, what claims are approved, and so forth. So are you talking about the potential of really a private insurance product that is funded by premiums collected by the state through a 0.5% payroll tax?
I'm saying that Connecticut's going to be one of the very first states in the country with paid family and medical leave. And that's important. And we've failed on that here in this building on and off for some years now, and I'm going to get that passed. But I've also said, Paz, I'm going to do this in the most efficient, effective, high-quality way I can. And if that's Department of Labor, if that's some quasi-public-private, if that's working with some of the private carriers here who already do manage paid family in New York City, for example, in New York State, I want to see at the table because I want to do this in the way that gives the taxpayers confidence we're doing it on a reliable way. I'm also going to have public oversight. You know, it's going to be the public. It's going to be DOL or something like that to make sure that we adjudicate claims in a fair way. We're not giving away the ship, but I am going to do it in the most effective and efficient way I can. And that's a hard line for me.
I'm sorry, the hard line is what?
That we keep those options open so we deliver this service in the most efficient and effective way possible.
There's constant bickering about the 0.5 point, that it's just not enough to do what you want to do. The half a point payroll tax.
There's no bickering for me. The bottom line is it's 50 basis points. That 50 basis points is not going up. That's enough for a middle-class person to get that insurance. And so we will make other adjustments if the 50 basis points is not it. But just remember what this means. You know, the 21st century, you know, you've got more single parents. You've got more two-earner parents if they're fortunate enough to be in that situation. And you've got to make sure that that single mom doesn't have to lose her job to take care of a sick child. This is what we're doing. And as a small business guy, first guy with that background sitting in this desk for an awful long time, I know that you don't want to lose that person. You don't want to spend a fortune retraining that person. It's in her best interest and in the small business. And I get it. I got to do some convincing on that front.
With the
Go ahead.
With a 0.5% set as an absolute, what have the actuaries told your administration about the other variables as to what will be affordable as far as weeks of coverage and percentage of wage replacement?
The actuaries have given us a great deal of confidence that 50 basis points gives us some wiggle room. We've been able to look at New York, at other states, California, other states that are doing this. We've been able to leverage off of that. I think I'll double check that, though. Actuaries are actuaries, and that's one of the reasons I'll probably do an RFP, and I'll see what's the best ideas Department of Labor has, what's the best ideas the Hartford or Travelers has, how do they do it, how fast can they get that up, what are the upfront costs, if any, to the state, so that people have 100% confidence that we're doing this as efficiently as we can.
One other thing. What are the concerns raised? I mean, some of the proponents, legislative proponents, labor proponents say it doesn't matter who runs it to some of them. Others say they are concerned about a private entity ruling on basically claims. That will they have a profit motive to deny certain claims that somebody is not?
No, public will oversee that. Public will adjudicate that. That's what. This is a public benefit that we're going to deliver as efficiently as possible. But it's really important to updating the workplace of the 21st century. I want Connecticut to be a leader here, and I do believe that we're going to get this passed.
Governor, you said, what's it been like sort of governing in a state, as you said, that's sort of down on itself? You're kind of optimistic or sending an optimistic message. But there's a lot of people out there that there's a sense of malaise, angst. They just, you go to a toll protest and you can, anybody there, but no matter how many numbers are there, you're gonna talk to people and say, I'm leaving here. So what's it like, especially given some of your big priorities are contentious, and your budget proposal includes a couple $1 billion in taxes.
What I can tell you is I'm going to talk to the Regional Plan Association tomorrow. That's New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And Paul, so one of the things I'm reminded of when I was growing up in the 1970s in New York City is over as we know it. It's the hole in the donut. GE is leaving. This is it. Everybody's going to the suburbs, and that was a pretty bullish time for Connecticut, by the way. Fast forward 30 years, GE's leaving Connecticut. We're down on ourselves a little bit. But the point is, these things change if you make good policy. Look what happened to New York. It's now the global capital of the world. And companies are vying to go in, paying for the right to go in there. It's a international search for talent. So how does Connecticut leverage off that? How do we make sure we have the talent as part of that ecosystem to turn things around? Things turn around. Things turn around with good leadership.
If I could switch to marijuana for a minute. I asked you about this last week, and you said to look at it. I presume you had a chance to at least read some of the news stories about it, about the last leg of this trilogy of 3 bills that they're doing that would call for the majority of the new revenue that's raised to go into the cities that have been most impacted, and that sort of dovetails off of the expungement and giving preference to dealers there and what have you. Does that third leg appeal to you now as part of it? Because the inner city legislators say they won't vote for this in the final rung unless it includes all that stuff.
I mentioned sort of false choices. What I don't like is the idea, legal marijuana or no marijuana. That's what the choice is. No, that's not what the choice is. As I said before, it's going to be legal, carefully regulated marijuana, or marijuana that's controlled by the black market and all the bad things that are happening to our community, A, in terms of fentanyl, B, in terms of a lot of young people who are losing their lives in the incarceration system, or losing a lot. So that's the big item. Are we going to take care of that or not? Look, the legislature's taken the lead on this. In terms of my priorities, it's important, but I'm going to let them take the lead on that. I agree with the equity element. I think a kid that goes away for selling pot, it's 10 years later, that's a law that we've now expunged, and I think their record should be expunged. That makes pretty good sense to me.
Can I rephrase his question? How do you think the revenues from marijuana should be used? Yeah. Should they go into the general fund, or should they be earmarked to be spent specifically in the cities that have been most impacted by the war on drugs?
I'm not sure the two are mutually exclusive, but in my world, I like a little control of where the money goes. I don't like everything earmarked. If you ask my preference, I look at the opioid epidemic, and I think we could do a little better job there, so it'd be ironic, but maybe some of the revenues can go towards treatment, mental health, and the opioid addiction. We've made a little start on that, given a constrained budget over the last few weeks on opioid, but those would be my priorities. That's Willimantic. It's not just New Haven.
Governor, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. You'll get in a minute.
As long as I get a question before Mark's next one, I won't.
Who's that?
Governor, what are your priorities surrounding affordable housing?
We've got, I'm told, hundreds of millions of dollars in the bond pipeline right now. So that's why we haven't allocated a lot of new money. I would say that if transportation bonding further cuts our debt diet, that would really slam affordable housing, which is the priority progress plan. So I think that would be the wrong way to go. I think that for me, affordable housing and transportation go hand in hand. And I see our cities becoming major transportation hubs the way they were in yesteryear. I see transit-oriented development is a big piece of that, so people can get in and out with less reliance upon the automobile. And that's where I see the state over the next 25 years.
What happens when some transient-oriented developments that are being proposed are not approved at the local level? What role does the state play in getting those across the finish line, or if the locals don't want it, then it shouldn't move forward, or what's your position on that?
I think my general position is we have a lot of local control in this state. There's no question about it. So I would work collaboratively with the locals in terms of what they want or what they're not willing to take. You know, I would urge them, though. I'd say I think transit-oriented development around your stations is an important thing, not just for urban areas, but for, you know, suburban towns. Look, I've got the benefit. I was in Greenwich, obviously. Now I'm in West Hartford. West Hartford's alive. I mean, they allowed a lot of, you know, multifamily housing and condos and rentals there, a lot of young people there. The average age of West Hartford, I think, is 10 years younger than Greenwich because they were a little reluctant to allow that to happen. I mean, that's a story I will tell, but at the end of the day, that community will probably take the lead on making that choice.
Governor, you said in a letter to Jeff Bezos that you're re-engineering state agencies and services from the taxpayer's shoes. And you said just now that you're holding the line on taxes. But when you look at the combination of your budget, your support for paid family medical leave and tolls, all in, that's $1.9 billion a year, and there are no cuts to agency spending. How do those two comments jive?
Does anybody else have any questions before Dan asks a question?
I'll go after that.
No, I'm kidding. Here's what I meant by that. I said for the first time in this state, you have somebody at the Department of Administrative Services who doesn't come from the political world. He comes from 12 years at IBM. He is going to fundamentally re-engineer the state government. I'm sorry I can't do it all in a year, but you will see the difference over the next 5 and 10 years. We're making real investments in technology. We're making sure that those tens of thousands of different transactions that you and the taxpayers have with our state government, you know, often with pen and paper, putting a stamp on it, often needing a notary public, we're going to do that online. So it's faster, more nimble, and less expensive. I think that's part of what we were talking about, that I want to move Connecticut government from, as I said before, from a Sears Roebuck government to an Amazon government, where we're online and able to move faster. And I was trying to say, you know, Amazon, if you have any interest at all in our amazing state, you're going to have an ally here.
Go ahead.
What do you attribute the success of the recent bond sale to?
Absolutely, because I went around with Melissa and Sean to most of their meetings. They really thought that we were, for the first time, taking our fixed costs seriously. What we do on the pensions, what I think we're going to be able to do, trying to do on employee health care, in particular debt diet, which is one thing I actually do have real control over. And I think they would have been stronger out of the box in terms of their enthusiasm, except they're not quite sure what's going to come out of the legislature, so there's a bit of a wait and see, but there's generally a positive feeling. I think you saw that reflected in the appetite for Connecticut bonds, something you haven't seen in a long time.
Do you attribute any of that to the recent federal tax reform?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a 30% hit to, you know, taxpayers or a certain category of taxpayers, and that makes municipal or tax-exempt bonds more valuable as well. Absolutely.
All right. And so how much money are we saving per year by not going out and borrowing $2 billion?
I can tell you in terms of the differential on the interest rate, I've read that that's about $50 million a year because we're paying, our money is now less expensive for us to borrow than it was before. Does that answer the question? Yeah.
How do you feel about a different rate for capital gains and the mansion tax and taking money out of the surplus, since you've already introduced the topic in order to match the Dalio gift?
I think I've been very strict on the rainy day fund, and it's not a rainy day. And if we start breaking faith on what we said the rainy day fund is, that's a slippery slope. You know, the surplus. What you don't do with the surplus, Mark, is you don't use it to pay ongoing operating expenses, because that's just the type of mentality that got us into this mess over the last 30 years, where we'll pay for it out of the surplus this year, we'll figure out how we pay for it next year. That's not the way to do it. You know, on the Dalio thing, it's a one-time $20 million upfront for our share of, you know, his $100 million contribution. And I think that's a one-off deal that is appropriate, and it gets money to, schools most in need. What was the third one you had?
Capital gains.
Capital gains.
Capital gains and a mansion tax.
I would say I've been pretty strict on not raising tax rates. Yeah, everybody comes in and goes, hey, come on, Gov, it's just a half a point. It's just another point. It's not that big a deal. But it's the fourth time in, 12 years or something like that, on top of Christine pointing out non-deductibility of SALT, state and local taxes. That's a big tax increase to people. What they really want, look, Bob was going to eliminate taxes. He was going to eliminate all these taxes. I've tried to be relatively frank about what I want to do, and that's give you a little predictability and consistency in terms of tax as well as, aid to our municipalities. And so I'm not inclined to raise any of those rates.
The topical story today is the bar's release of the Mueller report, swinging over to federal stuff. What is your view on that? Do you think Barr has done a bad job? Do you think it's a whitewash? What is your view of the whole thing?
Trump asked me to do this event today to get the Mueller report off the front page.
You kind of block it off. Lamont's 100 days.
Look, I got to tell you, I'm focused on Connecticut. I think we know what's going to happen on the Mueller report. I think the Democrats will cherry pick things that are good for their case. I think the Republicans will cherry pick things that are good for their case. That'll dominate Fox and MSNBC for the next 3 days, and then we're all going to complain about how much is redacted and what's there in 3 years, and what aren't we able to see? And I don't know. All I know is I think Mueller seems to be a pretty credible guy.
Are you placing a premium on trying to have a working relationship with the Trump administration, given that you and many other governors are hoping that there's some substance to the president's comments about putting money into infrastructure?
I think the answer to that is yes. I mean, I have met with Elaine Chao. As you know, I just met with the Secretary of Labor, Acosta, the other day. For me to work with those cabinet officials, let them know who we are and what we're thinking about. Met with the head of HHS the other day. Somebody else in our team did. So we have a good working. I met with Linda McMahon. So I think that's the way we're going to try and work on this. Larson introduced me to the head of Ways and Means. He's up there in Springfield. I mean, he just said, Connecticut, rev your engines. We're going to have a $1 trillion infrastructure bill, and it's coming along the pike, and it's got, as you point out, bipartisan support, including President Trump. And who's ever going to have their big projects ready to go, who's ever got a source of funding so we can pay our 20% or whatever it ends up being, is going to be at the front of the line. That's what he told me to do.
Would it be easier to sell if you said, I'm going to cut the gas tax and institute tolls? I mean, can you do that?
Once I get the tolling in place, we have a lot of flexibility. I'd love to talk to people about that. We can talk about reducing the gas tax a little bit. We can talk about subsidizing a bus service so that it's $1 a ride. It's already 80% subsidized. We can look at car tax. We can do a lot of things that give people confidence that we understand. I'm asking them to make a little bit of a sacrifice for the future of the state.
On tolls, Governor, you announced before you issued your budget that you're proposing a universal tolling plan and a truck-only tolling plan. Go into some detail in your budget document in the introduction. Yet the bill that your administration introduced speaks only of tolling the 3 interstates and the 2 parkways. Nothing about come up with Plan A, tolls for trucks only, and universal tolling. Why?
I'm not going to know if it's legal or not for quite a while. And they had a court case in Rhode Island. What was it? A couple months ago now. All they did was remand it back to this
But if it's just
state.
them developing a plan, then why not have them develop both plans, as you said? This court case.
Because I'm ready to
could get
hit the
resolved.
ground running. I'm ready to get this state moving again. I'm ready to find a reliable, steady source of revenue devoted strictly to rebuilding our transportation system, making darn sure politicians can't get their hands on that. And I want to get that going. I think we can get that going over the next few years if we start now. I don't want to wait to hear what the courts in Rhode Island say.
Well, could you understand then how people who believe that you flip-flopped on tolls would see this as just another flip-flop? You said You're going to propose 2 tolling options. You only presented 1 tolling option. You didn't direct the DOT to present 2 tolling options.
No, because I thought we were going to have a Rhode Island decision that said truck only can do it. You can do it just on those bridges, or you can do that more comprehensively. We could have a tolling option that from trucks that raise $200 million or $300 million.
I understand
So
all
those
that.
are all the reasons that I've got to hit the ground running on
I
this.
understand that, but my point is, you said in your document you were going to propose 2 options. There isn't 2 options in your bill, and my question was, when people understand that and they're critical of your position already, doesn't that just give them more fodder?
I don't think they need more
evidence?
fodder. I think I could have 1 toll at 10 cents, and it would be pretty aggravating to an awful lot of people in this state. So I don't think that's really the issue.
On business policy, are you going to have any incentive deals at all? Or I know you're cutting back, but are there going to be any? Are there any in the works? And secondly, are you doing anything about Connecticut's famous zealous regulatory regime on corporate issues in EPA and banking?
Look, we're not going to unilaterally disarm. I mean, I'm competing with other states. I'm talking to businesses. But I think the way we did our incentives was, let's say, not that effective. I think we paid a lot of money up front, grants, forgivable loans. Then we didn't really hold people as accountable as they could have been. So David Lehman is totally recasting how we're going to do those incentives to make sure that it's in the out years, not upfront, not an upfront grant. It's tied to employment. But yeah, I've got to be able to compete. But I'll just leave you all with this thought. The best way for us to compete is not incentives. It's to have an honestly balanced budget. It's to have a transportation system that works. And it's to have the best trained workforce in the world, so those folks looking for talent think Connecticut's the place they want to be.
That you cannot have a final version here because there's going to be a lot of give and take with the Federal Highway Administration on whether the congestion pricing is variable enough to actually meet the goals of that program. But will you be, or your administration be putting forward before the House or Senate is asked to vote, sort of another draft of what you're talking about, something that would give legislators perhaps a little bit more assurance as to what the hell this thing's going to look like?
I think they know exactly what things are looking like. They know that more or less how many gantries we have, not to exceed 50. They know it's not to exceed those 4 highways that we talked about. I talked about the fact that, the rate, I'll do it in collaboration with Gina and Charlie, but we put in place a price. I think they know the type of discounts we're talking about. And I just tell, anybody that needs more information or wants to weigh in, please come to this office and see me. I've got some flexibility there. I've got, Department of Transportation says they're ready to move on this. We're ready to go. And I want as many people at the table as I can. And that's the way I govern. That's the way I ran my business. And I think that's in the best interest of the state. And with that, Keating,
Last one.
let me just say.
I got a good one.
All right.
I got a better one.
Oh, my God. I knew this was going to be.
Back to infrastructure, very simple. Back to infrastructure and Trump. If Trump has anything to do with it, do you really think that a blue state like Connecticut is going to get a lot of federal transportation money with Trump in charge?
Hey, there's yeah, we got the House Ways and Means Committee is, run by a Democrat, and there's a guy named John Larson who's very senior there. And I'm not antagonizing anybody. We're going to work together, but we're going to get our fair share. We're going to show we've earned it. We can show this is where the need is, and we're ready to hit the ground running. Hey, thanks, everybody.
How do you determine what they learn?